Sarah Mitchell never thought her life would become a nightmare when she married into the wealthy Patterson family. The 28-year-old nurse from small-town Ohio had fallen in love with Marcus Patterson during his recovery from a skiing accident at the hospital where she worked. Marcus seemed different from his family's reputation for ruthless business dealings and political connections. He was gentle, caring, and genuinely interested in her dreams of opening a medical clinic for underprivileged children. The Patterson family owned a vast empire of real estate, defense contracts, and offshore investments worth over $500 million. Marcus was the youngest son, often overlooked by his father Richard Patterson, a former senator who still wielded considerable political influence. The family patriarch had built his fortune through questionable deals and strategic alliances that often crossed ethical boundaries. Richard's wife, Elena Patterson, came from old European money and believed their bloodline should remain pure from outside influences. When Marcus announced his engagement to Sarah, the family's reaction was immediate and hostile. Richard saw Sarah as a gold digger who would dilute their wealth and compromise their carefully maintained social standing. Elena was even more direct in her opposition, viewing Sarah as beneath their status and unworthy of the Patterson name. Only Marcus's older brother, James, seemed neutral, though Sarah would later discover his indifference masked something much darker. The wedding took place despite the family's objections, with Sarah hoping that time would heal the rift. Marcus had inherited a trust fund that made him financially independent, so they bought a modest home in Virginia Beach, far from the Patterson estate in the Hamptons. For the first year of marriage, they lived quietly while Sarah worked at a local hospital and Marcus managed his investments. The distance from his family seemed to bring them peace, and Sarah began to believe they could build a life free from the Patterson influence. Everything changed when Marcus was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. The cancer was aggressive, and despite the best medical treatment money could buy, Marcus deteriorated rapidly. During his final months, he made a decision that would seal Sarah's fate. Marcus updated his will, leaving his entire inheritance to Sarah, including his shares in several family businesses and a trust fund worth $50 million. He also signed documents giving Sarah power of attorney over his medical decisions and business interests. Marcus died on a cold February morning, holding Sarah's hand in their Virginia Beach home. Sarah was devastated, having lost not only her husband but her best friend and the future they had planned together. She expected grief to be her greatest challenge, but she had no idea that the Patterson family was already plotting her destruction. The funeral was a tense affair held at the Patterson estate. Richard and Elena barely acknowledged Sarah's presence, treating her like an unwelcome intruder at their son's final gathering. James delivered a eulogy that painted Marcus as a victim of manipulation, suggesting that his illness had clouded his judgment in his final decisions. The message was clear. The family blamed Sarah for Marcus's choices and would not accept her as his legitimate heir. 3 weeks after the funeral, Sarah received a visit from the family's lawyer, demanding she contest Marcus's will and return the inheritance to the family. When she refused, explaining that she intended to honor Marcus's wishes and use the money for the medical clinic they had dreamed of building together, the lawyer's tone became threatening. He suggested that fighting the Patterson family would be unwise and potentially dangerous for someone in her position. Sarah hired her own attorney and prepared to defend Marcus's will in court. She had documentation proving that Marcus was mentally competent when he made his decisions, and medical records showing he had been clear about his intentions. What she didn't know was that the Patterson family had no intention of fighting her in court. They had decided that Sarah posed too great a threat to their interests and reputation to be allowed to live. Richard Patterson had connections throughout the defense industry and government agencies from his years as a senator. He reached out to a contact who specialized in solving problems that required complete discretion. The contact recommended a team of former military contractors who operated outside official channels and could make problems disappear without leaving traces back to their employers. Meanwhile, James Patterson was developing his own plan. Unlike his father, who favored hiring outsiders, James believed the family should handle their problems directly. He had served briefly in the military before being discharged for psychological issues, and maintained connections with several individuals who shared his unstable mindset. James began recruiting a group of men who were willing to eliminate Sarah in exchange for money and the promise of protection from prosecution. Sarah remained unaware of the danger surrounding her as she tried to rebuild her life. She had moved back to Ohio to be closer to her elderly parents and was working part-time while managing Marcus's investments. The inheritance had made her financially secure, but she lived modestly, saving most of the money for the medical clinic project. She received occasional threatening phone calls that she reported to local police, but the authorities seemed reluctant to investigate threats against someone involved in a high-profile inheritance dispute. The first attempt on Sarah's life came during a routine grocery shopping trip. As she loaded bags into her car in the parking lot, a van approached at high speed, clearly intending to strike her. Sarah jumped behind another vehicle just as the van crashed into her car and sped away. Local police investigated but found no leads, dismissing it as a possible road rage incident or failed carjacking. Sarah knew the incident was connected to the Patterson family, but she had no proof and no idea how to protect herself. She considered hiring private security, but wasn't sure who could be trusted. The inheritance that was supposed to secure her future had instead made her a target, and she felt trapped and isolated. What Sarah didn't know was that her late husband had anticipated this possibility. Marcus had confided his concerns about his family to a close friend from his military service, Navy SEAL Commander Jake Sullivan. During his final weeks, Marcus had asked Jake to watch over Sarah if anything happened to him, sensing that his family might retaliate against her. Jake Sullivan was a 15-year veteran of the Navy SEALs who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He specialized in high-risk rescue operations and had a reputation for never leaving a teammate behind. Jake had met Marcus during a joint training exercise years earlier, and despite their different backgrounds, they had developed a strong friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. When Jake learned about the parking lot incident through news reports, he immediately recognized the signs of a planned assassination attempt. He took emergency leave from his duties and drove to Ohio to assess the situation. Jake had dealt with enough enemies to recognize when someone was being systematically targeted for elimination. Jake's arrival in Sarah's small Ohio town went unnoticed by the Patterson surveillance teams who were monitoring her activities. He spent several days observing from a distance, noting the patterns of suspicious individuals who seemed to be tracking Sarah's movements. Jake identified at least 3 different groups conducting surveillance, suggesting that multiple parties were planning operations against her. The second attempt on Sarah's life occurred while she was jogging through a local park early in the morning. 2 men approached from different directions, attempting to corner her on an isolated trail. Sarah's nursing training had included self-defense courses, and she managed to evade the first attacker long enough to scream for help. The men fled when they heard other joggers approaching, but not before one of them warned Sarah that she couldn't run forever. This time, Sarah called Jake Sullivan directly. Using the contact information Marcus had left in a sealed letter she was supposed to open if she ever felt threatened. Jake listened to her story and immediately understood the scope of the danger she faced. He explained that the Patterson family was using professional killers and that local police would be unable to provide adequate protection against such threats. Jake made a decision that would change both their lives. He called his SEAL team commander and requested extended leave to handle a family emergency. Jake had accumulated years of unused leave time, and his exemplary service record meant his request was approved without question. He then contacted 3 retired SEALs who owed him favors and convinced them to help protect an innocent civilian who was being targeted by corrupt wealthy individuals. The team Jake assembled included Tommy Rodriguez, a former explosives expert who had left the military after losing his leg in an IED explosion, Mike Chun, a sniper who had transitioned to private security after his service, and David Washington, a communications specialist who now worked as a cybersecurity consultant. All 3 men had served with Jake and trusted his judgment completely. Jake explained the situation to his team without revealing Sarah's identity or the specific details of the inheritance dispute. He presented it as a mission to protect an innocent civilian whose deceased husband had been their mutual friend. The team agreed to help, motivated by loyalty to Jake and their shared commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The four SEALs established a covert protection detail around Sarah while gathering intelligence on the threats against her. They used military-grade surveillance equipment to monitor the Patterson surveillance teams and identified the various groups planning operations. What they discovered shocked even these experienced warriors. The Patterson family had hired 3 separate assassination teams to ensure Sarah's elimination. Richard Patterson's hired contractors were professional killers with extensive experience in making murders look like accidents. James Patterson's group consisted of unstable individuals with military backgrounds who favored more direct and violent approaches. The third group was a wild card that appeared to be operating independently, possibly hired by Elena Patterson without her husband's knowledge. Jake realized that Sarah was facing a coordinated campaign of assassination attempts that would eventually succeed unless the threat was eliminated at its source. Protecting her reactively would only delay the inevitable outcome. The SEAL team needed to shift from defense to offense, but doing so would require them to operate outside the law and risk their own futures. The decision became urgent when Jake's surveillance detected signs that all 3 assassination teams were planning a coordinated attack for the following weekend. Sarah was scheduled to attend a memorial service for Marcus at a small church in Virginia, and the killers had identified this as the perfect opportunity to eliminate her in a location where they could control the environment and escape routes. Jake faced an impossible choice. He could convince Sarah to skip the memorial service and relocate to a safe house, but the assassination teams would simply wait for another opportunity. Or he could allow her to attend the service while his team prepared to engage multiple groups of professional killers in what would essentially be a small-scale war. Sarah made the decision for him when she insisted on attending the small church in rural Virginia had been Marcus Patterson's sanctuary during his childhood summers at his grandmother's estate. Sarah had chosen this location for the memorial service because it represented the man Marcus had been before his family's influence took hold. The white wooden building sat on a hill overlooking farmland, connected to the main road by a single winding path that made it both picturesque and tactically vulnerable. Jake Sullivan and his team arrived at the location 3 days before the memorial service to conduct a detailed reconnaissance. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears about the upcoming assassination attempt. All 3 enemy teams had already established observation posts around the church, and preliminary preparations suggested they were planning to turn the peaceful memorial into a killing field. Richard Patterson's professional contractors had rented a house 2 miles from the church and were using it as their operational base. Jake's surveillance revealed that this team consisted of 5 men with extensive military and intelligence backgrounds. They had sophisticated equipment including long-range rifles, explosive devices, and communication systems that allowed them to coordinate with precision. Their plan appeared to involve eliminating Sarah during the service using sniper fire, then covering their escape with diversionary explosions. James Patterson's group had taken a more direct approach, establishing a campsite in the woods behind the church under the pretense of being hunters. This team included 4 men with combat experience, but questionable psychological stability. Their surveillance indicated they favored assault weapons and planned to attack the church directly during the service. James himself was leading this group, driven by a personal hatred for Sarah that went beyond the family's financial concerns. The third assassination team remained the most mysterious. David Washington's electronic surveillance had detected their communications, but couldn't identify their exact location or composition. What they knew suggested this group was smaller but possibly more dangerous than the others, with access to military-grade equipment and training that rivaled Jake's own team. Tommy Rodriguez spent hours studying the church building and surrounding area for potential explosive devices. His experience with improvised explosive devices in Iraq had taught him to recognize signs that others would miss. He discovered that someone had already planted small charges around the church's foundation, timed to detonate during the memorial service. The explosives were sophisticated enough to bring down the building while making the collapse appear accidental. Mike Chen established sniper positions at 3 different locations around the church, each offering overlapping fields of fire to protect Sarah from long-range attacks. His military service had included some of the longest confirmed kills in SEAL history, and he was confident he could neutralize enemy snipers before they could harm Sarah. However, the presence of innocent civilians at the memorial service would limit his ability to engage targets aggressively. David Washington worked around the clock to penetrate the enemy communication networks and gather intelligence on their specific plans. His cybersecurity expertise allowed him to intercept encrypted messages between the assassination teams, revealing that they were aware of each other's presence, but were not coordinating their efforts. This lack of coordination could work in favor of Jake's team, but it also made the enemy actions unpredictable. Jake spent his time developing a comprehensive strategy to protect Sarah while neutralizing all three threats simultaneously. The challenge was enormous. His four-person team needed to defeat at least 12 professional killers while ensuring the safety of approximately 50 civilians who would be attending the memorial service. Traditional military tactics were useless in this situation because any collateral damage would be unacceptable. The breakthrough came when David discovered that the mysterious third assassination team was actually a group of former CIA operatives working directly for Elena Patterson. This team had been instructed to eliminate not only Sarah but also the other assassination teams to eliminate witnesses to the Patterson family's involvement. Elena's operatives planned to wait until the other teams had attacked Sarah, then kill everyone present at the church, and make it appear to be a terrorist attack. This intelligence changed everything for Jake's team. Instead of facing three separate threats, they were dealing with a complex situation where two enemy groups would likely engage each other while the third group planned to eliminate all witnesses. Jake realized that with careful timing and positioning, his team could use the enemy's conflicting objectives against them. Sarah arrived in Virginia 2 days before the memorial service, staying at a small bed and breakfast that Jake's team had thoroughly secured. She remained unaware of the full extent of the protection surrounding her, believing that Jake was simply providing basic security while she attended the memorial. Jake had decided that informing Sarah about the assassination plots would only increase her stress without improving her safety. The night before the memorial service, Jake met privately with Sarah to explain the basic security precautions she would need to follow during the event. He presented these measures as routine protection for someone involved in a high-profile legal dispute, avoiding any mention of the lethal threats surrounding her. Sarah agreed to wear a protective vest under her dress and to follow Jake's positioning instructions during the service. As dawn broke on the morning of the memorial service, all three assassination teams began their final preparations. Richard Patterson's contractors moved into their predetermined sniper positions, expecting to eliminate Sarah with a single shot as she entered the church. James Patterson's group prepared for their assault, planning to attack immediately after the sniper shot to ensure Sarah's death and eliminate any witnesses. Elena Patterson's CIA operatives remained hidden in the woods, monitoring communications from all parties and preparing to eliminate everyone at the church once the other teams had completed their missions. Their sophisticated planning included plans to plant evidence suggesting that international terrorists had attacked the memorial service, providing cover for the Patterson family's involvement. Jake's team took their positions before sunrise, invisible to the enemy surveillance, and prepared for what they knew would be the most intense combat of their careers. Each SEAL had a specific mission that would require split-second timing and perfect execution. The margin for error was zero, and failure would result in Sarah's death along with the deaths of dozens of innocent civilians. Tommy Rodriguez positioned himself near the church building with equipment to defuse the explosive devices he had discovered around the foundation. His plan was to disarm the charges without alerting the enemies to his presence, removing the threat of the building collapse that would kill everyone inside. Tommy's experience with explosive ordnance disposal in combat zones had prepared him for this precise and dangerous work. Mike Chen established his primary sniper position in the church bell tower, with secondary positions pre-planned if he needed to relocate quickly. His role was to eliminate enemy snipers before they could target Sarah, then provide covering fire for the rest of his team as they engaged the assault teams. Mike had modified his rifle with a suppressor to reduce the noise signature of his shots. David Washington set up his electronic warfare equipment in a concealed position where he could monitor enemy communications and coordinate his team's response. His job was to disrupt enemy coordination at the critical moment while providing real-time intelligence to Jake and the others. David also had responsibility for calling in emergency medical support if any civilians were injured during the engagement. Jake positioned himself closest to Sarah, prepared to provide immediate protection while directing his team's overall response to the unfolding threats. His experience in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue operations made him the best choice for ensuring Sarah's survival in the chaotic environment that was about to unfold. The memorial service began at 10 a.m. with approximately 50 people in attendance. Sarah had arranged for a simple ceremony that would honor Marcus's memory without the elaborate formality his family would have preferred. The attendees included Sarah's parents, several of her friends from nursing school, and some of Marcus's college classmates who had remained loyal to his memory despite his family's disapproval. As Sarah stood at the front of the church speaking about Marcus's dreams for their medical clinic, Richard Patterson's sniper team prepared to take their shot. The lead sniper had Sarah in his crosshairs and was preparing to squeeze the trigger when Mike Chin's bullet found its target. The enemy sniper died instantly, his rifle falling from the window of the house 2 miles away. The sound of Mike's suppressed rifle was masked by the noise of a tractor working in a nearby field, but the other enemy teams immediately recognized that their operation had been compromised. James Patterson's assault team abandoned their original plan and began an immediate attack on the church, hoping to complete their mission before unknown defenders could organize a response. Jake heard the vehicles approaching through his earpiece communication with David Washington and immediately moved to shield Sarah from the incoming threat. He pushed her behind the altar while shouting for the congregation to take cover, his authoritative military voice cutting through the confusion and panic that erupted in the small church. The first explosion came from Tommy Rodriguez, eliminating one of the foundation charges before it could detonate automatically. The blast shook the building but did not cause structural damage, though several civilians were injured by falling debris. Tommy continued working methodically to disarm the remaining charges while gunfire erupted outside the church building. James Patterson's assault team reached the church just as Mike Chin eliminated their driver with a precision shot that caused their vehicle to crash into a tree. The surviving attackers took cover behind the wrecked vehicle and began firing automatic weapons at the church windows, their bullets splintering the wooden walls and sending terrified civilians diving for cover between the pews. Jake returned fire through the shattered windows while maintaining his position protecting Sarah. His military training allowed him to engage multiple targets while keeping track of civilian locations to avoid accidentally harming innocent people. The small church filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the sound of splintering wood as the firefight intensified. David Washington detected radio chatter indicating that Elena Patterson's CIA operatives were moving toward the church to eliminate all witnesses as planned. He warned Jake through their communication system that a third enemy force was approaching with more sophisticated weapons and training than the assault team they were currently fighting. The battle reached its climax when James Patterson himself appeared at the church entrance carrying an assault rifle and shouting threats at Sarah. His psychological instability was evident in his wild behavior as he sprayed bullets randomly into the church interior, more interested in causing terror than achieving tactical objectives. Jake engaged James Patterson in close-quarters combat, tackling him in the church aisle while civilians cowered in terror around them. The two men struggled for control of the assault rifle while Jake tried to minimize the danger to nearby innocents. Jake's superior training eventually prevailed, and he managed to disarm and subdue James Patterson without using lethal force. The arrival of Elena Patterson's CIA operatives changed the dynamic of the battle completely. These men were professionals with training equal to Jake's team, and they approached the church with tactical precision and superior firepower. Their plan to eliminate all witnesses meant that every civilian in the church was now a target for assassination. Mike Chun engaged the CIA operatives from his sniper position, but their body armor and tactical equipment made them difficult targets even for his expert marksmanship. The firefight evolved into a complex three-way engagement with Jake's team protecting civilians while fighting two different enemy forces with conflicting objectives. Tommy Rodriguez completed his explosive ordnance disposal mission just as the CIA operatives began their final assault on the church. The building remained structurally sound, But the interior was becoming increasingly dangerous as bullets flew from multiple directions and ricocheted off walls and pews. The turning point came when David Washington successfully penetrated the CIA operatives' communication system and broadcast false orders that confused their coordination. The momentary disruption allowed Mike Chun to eliminate two operatives with rapid precision shots, while Jake and Tommy Rodriguez flanked the remaining enemies from different angles. Sarah remained behind the altar throughout the battle. Following the immediate aftermath of the church battle resembled a war zone more than a peaceful memorial service. Local emergency responders arrived to find a small building riddled with bullet holes, several vehicles destroyed by explosions, and multiple bodies scattered around the property. The FBI took control of the crime scene within hours, recognizing that the sophisticated nature of the attack indicated federal crimes and possible national security implications. Sarah sat in the back of an ambulance, physically unharmed but emotionally shattered by the violence she had witnessed. The memorial service for her late husband had become a battlefield where people died protecting her from assassins hired by his own family. The guilt and trauma of survival weighed heavily on her mind as she watched investigators document evidence of the conspiracy that had nearly claimed her life. Jake Sullivan found himself in the unusual position of being both a hero and a potential criminal in the eyes of federal investigators. His unauthorized use of military tactics on American soil to protect a civilian had prevented multiple murders, but it also raised questions about his authority to engage in armed combat outside official military operations. The FBI agents interviewing him struggled to understand how four men had defeated multiple assassination teams while protecting dozens of innocent civilians. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the immediate crime scene as investigators discovered the scope of the Patterson family conspiracy. James Patterson's capture provided a direct link to the family's involvement, but his psychological instability made him an unreliable witness who provided information in rambling, incoherent statements that required careful analysis to extract useful facts. Richard Patterson learned about the failed assassination attempt while attending a political fundraiser in Washington, D.C. His initial reaction was disbelief that professional contractors could have been defeated by unknown defenders, followed by panic as he realized that his involvement in the conspiracy could be exposed. Richard immediately contacted his legal team and began implementing contingency plans to distance himself from the assassination teams. Elena Patterson received news of the church battle while traveling in Europe, having deliberately positioned herself outside the country to establish an alibi for the time of Sarah's planned murder. Her reaction was colder and more calculating than her husband's panic. Elena began making arrangements to eliminate any remaining evidence of her involvement while preparing to sacrifice her family members if necessary to protect herself. The FBI investigation intensified when David Washington provided investigators with intercepted communications proving the Patterson family's direct involvement in hiring the assassination teams. His electronic surveillance evidence included recorded conversations between family members and their contractors, financial transactions paying for weapons and equipment, and detailed planning documents outlining the various murder plots. Federal prosecutors recognized that they had uncovered one of the most extensive conspiracy cases in recent history, involving wealthy individuals who had used their resources and connections to plan multiple murders on American soil. The case would require careful handling due to the political connections and financial influence of the Patterson family, but the evidence was overwhelming and the crimes were too serious to ignore. Jake's team faced their own legal challenges as military investigators examined their actions during the church battle. While their intervention had saved lives and prevented multiple murders, their unauthorized use of military training and equipment in civilian operations violated numerous regulations and potentially several laws. The Navy launched an internal investigation to determine whether disciplinary action was warranted against active duty personnel. Sarah's legal team, led by her inheritance lawyer, began working with federal prosecutors to ensure her protection during the investigation and trial proceedings. The Patterson family still possessed considerable resources and influence, and there were concerns that they might attempt to eliminate Sarah before she could testify about Marcus's intentions regarding his inheritance and his fears about his family's reaction. The media coverage of the church battle created a national sensation, with news outlets struggling to understand how a simple inheritance dispute had escalated into a military-style engagement involving multiple assassination teams. The story captured public attention because it combined elements of family drama, military heroism, and corruption among wealthy elites who believed themselves above the law. Tommy Rodriguez faced the most serious legal consequences among Jake's team due to his handling of explosive devices during the battle. Federal investigators discovered that he had not only disarmed enemy explosives but had also used improvised charges to disable enemy vehicles and equipment. His actions had been necessary to protect civilians, but his use of explosive devices without proper authorization violated multiple federal laws. Mike Chin's sniper actions during the battle raised questions about the rules of engagement for military personnel operating on American soil. His precision shooting had prevented multiple murders and protected innocent civilians, but military snipers are not authorized to engage targets in civilian areas without specific orders from command authority. The legal system struggled to address the conflict between his duty to protect innocent life and his obligation to follow military regulations. The breakthrough in the federal investigation came when investigators discovered that Elena Patterson had maintained detailed records of her involvement in the assassination conspiracy. Her European banking connections had required extensive documentation for the financial transactions used to pay the CIA operatives, and this evidence provided prosecutors with proof of her central role in planning Sarah's murder. Richard Patterson attempted to negotiate a plea agreement when he realized that the evidence against him was overwhelming. His political connections proved useless in the face of documented proof that he had hired professional killers to murder his daughter-in-law. Federal prosecutors were willing to consider reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation in exposing other aspects of the conspiracy. James Patterson's psychological evaluation revealed that his hatred for Sarah went beyond the family's financial concerns about Marcus's inheritance. His military discharge for psychological issues had been related to violent tendencies and an inability to accept authority from individuals he considered inferior. His personal vendetta against Sarah had motivated him to recruit unstable individuals for the assault team that attacked the church. The trial preparations revealed the full extent of the Patterson family's criminal enterprise, which had used their wealth and political connections to eliminate business competitors and personal enemies for decades. Sarah's case was just the most recent example of their willingness to commit murder to protect their interests, and investigators discovered evidence linking them to several other suspicious deaths over the past 20 years. Sarah struggled with survivor's guilt as she learned about the people who had died protecting her during the church battle. The enemy casualties didn't affect her emotionally, but she was haunted by the knowledge that innocent civilians had been injured and that Jake's team had risked their lives and careers to save someone they barely knew. Her gratitude was mixed with guilt about the consequences her survival had created for others. Jake received support from unexpected sources within the military command structure as details of his actions became known to senior officers. Many high-ranking officials privately approved of his decision to protect an innocent civilian from assassination, even though they couldn't officially endorse his unauthorized actions. This support proved crucial when military prosecutors considered whether to pursue court-martial proceedings against him and his team. The legal proceedings against the Patterson family became complicated when Elena Patterson disappeared from her European location, apparently having fled to a country without extradition treaties with the United States. Her escape demonstrated the sophisticated planning that had characterized the entire conspiracy and showed that wealthy criminals could still evade justice despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt. Richard Patterson's plea negotiations collapsed when investigators discovered that he was still attempting to have Sarah killed even while in federal custody. Recorded phone conversations revealed that he was using his remaining political connections to arrange for Sarah's elimination before she could testify at trial. This evidence of ongoing criminal activity eliminated any possibility of a reduced sentence. The medical clinic project that Marcus had envisioned became Sarah's way of healing from the trauma of the assassination attempts, and the subsequent legal proceedings. She used the inheritance money that had nearly cost her life to build a state-of-the-art medical facility that provided free health care to underprivileged children, creating a positive legacy from the violence and hatred that had surrounded her husband's death. Jake's team eventually received commendations from various law enforcement agencies for their actions during the church battle, though the military disciplinary proceedings continued for months. The public support for their intervention in protecting innocent civilians from assassination created political pressure to minimize any official punishment for their unauthorized actions. The trial of the surviving Patterson family members became a media spectacle that exposed the corruption and violence that wealthy families could perpetrate when they believed themselves above the law. Federal prosecutors used the case to send a message that money and political connections could not protect criminals who committed murder and conspiracy on American soil. Sarah's testimony during the trial provided crucial evidence about Marcus's fears regarding his family's reaction to his inheritance decisions. Her account of their threats and harassment after his death helped establish the motive for the assassination conspiracy and demonstrated the premeditated nature of the family's criminal planning. The sentencing phase of the trial resulted in life imprisonment for Richard Patterson and James Patterson, reflecting the severity of their crimes and the judge's determination to send a message about the consequences of using wealth and influence to commit murder. Elena Patterson remained a fugitive, but international arrest warrants ensured that she would face justice if she ever returned to any country with extradition agreements. Jake Sullivan ultimately received an official reprimand for his unauthorized actions, but was allowed to continue his military service with the understanding that his intervention had saved lives and prevented a massacre. His team members received similar treatment, with their heroic actions being recognized even as their violation of regulations was officially acknowledged. The medical clinic that Sarah built in Marcus's memory became a symbol of how good could emerge from evil, and how the love between two people could survive even the most violent attempts to destroy it. The facility provided free health care to thousands of children who otherwise would have suffered from treatable conditions, creating a lasting positive impact that honored Marcus's original vision. Sarah eventually found peace in her work at the clinic and in knowing that justice had been served against those who had tried to murder her. The inheritance that had made her a target became the foundation for helping others, and the violence that had surrounded her created a deeper appreciation for the simple joy of being alive and able to help people in need. The case became a landmark in federal law enforcement, demonstrating how wealthy criminals could be brought to justice despite their resources and connections when dedicated investigators and prosecutors were willing to pursue evidence wherever it led. The Patterson family's fall from power and privilege showed that no one was truly above the law in America. Jake maintained a friendship with Sarah that lasted long after the legal proceedings ended, based on their shared experience of surviving extreme violence and their mutual respect for each other's courage under pressure. Their bond represented the best aspects of human nature, the willingness to protect innocent people at great personal cost, and the strength to rebuild after trauma. The story of Sarah's survival and the Patterson family's downfall became an inspiration for other victims of wealthy predators who had previously felt powerless to seek justice against those with superior resources. Her example showed that courage, determination, and the support of good people could overcome even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Years later, as Sarah watched children playing in the medical clinic that bore Marcus's name, she reflected on how the worst experiences of her life had led to her most meaningful work. The assassination attempts that were meant to silence her had instead given her a platform to help others and a deeper understanding of the value of life and the importance of standing up for what is right, regardless of the personal cost. The legacy of the church battle extended beyond the immediate participants to influence military and law enforcement policies regarding the protection of civilians from sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Jake's team's successful intervention became a case study in tactical innovation and the importance of rapid response to protect innocent life, even when operating outside normal command structures. The Patterson family's criminal empire was dismantled completely, with their assets seized and distributed to victims of their various crimes over the decades. The investigation uncovered a network of corruption that reached into government agencies, defense contractors, and financial institutions, leading to additional prosecutions and reforms designed to prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating in the future. Sarah's survival and the exposure of the conspiracy against her demonstrated that even the most powerful and wealthy criminals could be defeated when their victims refused to be silenced, and when good people were willing to risk everything to protect innocent life. The Navy SEALs who came to her aid proved that honor, courage, and commitment to justice could overcome any threat, no matter how well-funded or politically connected. Ku's instructions to stay low and motionless despite the chaos surrounding her. She could hear the sounds of combat and knew that people were dying to protect her, but she also understood that any movement on her part could compromise the efforts of her protectors. The final CIA operative was eliminated when he attempted to throw a grenade into the church interior. Jake intercepted the explosive device and threw it back outside, where it detonated harmlessly in the empty churchyard. The blast marked the end of the firefight that had lasted less than 20 minutes, but felt like hours to the terrified civilians trapped inside. As silence fell over the battlefield, Jake's team conducted a rapid assessment of casualties and threats. 3 civilians had been injured by debris and flying glass, but none of the wounds were life-threatening. All enemy forces had been neutralized, with several killed and others, including James Patterson, captured alive. Emergency medical personnel and law enforcement arrived within minutes, summoned by David Washington's prepositioned call for assistance. Jake's team immediately transitioned from combat mode to providing medical aid for injured civilians and securing evidence from the crime scene. The aftermath of the memorial service battle would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The Patterson family's conspiracy to murder Sarah had been exposed in the most dramatic way possible, with multiple law enforcement agencies investigating their connections to the assassination teams. Sarah had survived, but her life would never be the same after witnessing the violence that had erupted around her. G. Marcus's memorial service despite Jake's warnings about the danger. She explained that missing the service would mean letting the Patterson family win and abandoning her promise to honor Marcus's memory. Sarah had spent months running and hiding, and she was ready to face whatever consequences came from standing up for herself and her late husband's wishes. Jake respected her courage but knew that attending the memorial service would likely result in her death unless his team could eliminate all 3 assassination teams before they could execute their plans. The SEALs had 72 hours to identify every member of the opposing forces, determine their capabilities and tactics, and develop a strategy to neutralize them without harming innocent civilians who would be attending the memorial service. The planning session took place in a rented cabin outside Sarah's hometown, where Jake's team analyzed intelligence and prepared for what they knew would be the most challenging operation of their careers. They were 4 retired and active military personnel preparing to engage multiple teams of professional assassins on American soil, with no official support and no legal authority for their actions. Tommy Rodriguez focused on identifying potential explosive devices and booby traps that might be planted at the church or along Sarah's route. Mike Chin studied the terrain around the memorial site and identified optimal positions for counter-sniper operations. David Washington worked on disrupting enemy communications and gathering real-time intelligence on their movements. Jake coordinated the overall strategy while preparing contingency plans for every possible scenario. As the weekend approached, Sarah continued her normal routine while the invisible war prepared to unfold around her. She had no idea that her decision to honor her husband's memory had triggered a confrontation that would determine not only her survival, but the fate of everyone involved in the conspiracy against her. The Patterson family's plot to eliminate an inconvenient widow was about to collide with the uncompromising loyalty and lethal skills of the U.S. Navy SEALs.